So let's talk about how to navigate. So the first thing that is helpful in Creo is to use the middle scroll wheel of your mouse. So as you scroll, you can zoom out or you can zoom in. And the scrolling follows where your cursor is. So if I move my cursor over to the left side of my model and I scroll out, you'll notice that the bike gets smaller and smaller, but it's getting smaller and smaller closer to the cursor. And then if I move my cursor over to the right side of the bike and I zoom in, you'll notice that I'm zooming in around my cursor. Now this becomes a very important property of the zoom function in Creo because it allows you to move your part around just by zooming. So I can zoom out and then put my cursor on the seat and zoom in and I've got the seat. Or I can zoom out and put my cursor on the crank and I can zoom into the crank. That's a very important type of navigation, and when you get on Creo, you'll be able to play around with that and see how that works. The second way to navigate is to push that scroll wheel down and hold it down and then move your mouse. And that allows you to spin or rotate your model so that you can see it in 3 dimensions. Now, one of the things you may have noticed as you've looked at this model is there's a little triad. You can kind of see it. It's red, green, and blue right in the center of my model. And that's something that we call the spin center. If I zoom way out, you'll see that that's all you see is that spin center. I zoom in, the spin center gets kind of small. That's the center around which my model is going to rotate unless I turn that spin center off. If I go back up to my display toolkit, I can turn that spin center off, and now my model is going to rotate about my cursor. So wherever I put my cursor is where my model will rotate. So that becomes helpful when I'm working with a large assembly, lots of parts, and I don't want it to rotate about the center. I want to be able to rotate it about, the area where I'm working. But in general, it's probably best to keep the spin center on because that way you know where your part is rotating about, and once you get a little more experience with Creo, why then you can turn that spin center off and rotate wherever you want to. The third way to navigate is to push the scroll wheel down again, but at the same time push the shift key on your keyboard. That allows you to pan your model back and forth. And I'm going to actually pan our model completely off the screen. And it's not uncommon that when you first start working with PTC Creo, you'll either rotate your model off the screen or you'll pan it off the screen or zoom it off the screen, and all of a sudden you'll be going, how do I get my model back? And if you come back up to your little display toolkit, right up here, you'll see on the left there's a little tool called Refit. We like to call that button the Get Out of Jail button. You click on that and your model comes back to the center. And if for some reason you don't see the Refit button in your toolkit, your display toolkit, you can just go to View, and Refit is right there, and you can click on the Refit. Okay, so let's review real quickly. There are 3 ways to navigate in Creo. First way is to use your scroll wheel and scroll in and out, and you zoom about the cursor. The second way is to push the scroll wheel down, hold it, and that allows you to rotate your model. And the third way is to hold that scroll wheel down, push the shift key, and that allows you to pan your model wherever you want on the screen. If you get lost, you hit the refit and your model is back. Okay. Now the second thing I want to talk about after we've talked now about navigation is to talk about kind of the different parts of the screen. What are you seeing and what does it mean? And obviously the most important part for you is the graphical representation of the solid model. And that's the image that you see there of the bike. And that's a very important part of the screen. To the left of that, you're going to see what's called the model tree. And the model tree is a different representation of that model. It's what we call a procedural representation. And by procedural, we mean that if you look at the model tree, you have the cool bike top assembly.asm. That's the top level of the assembly. And then the next thing you have are the datums. So these are the planes, the right plane, top plane, front plane, and then the default coordinate system. Following that, you'll notice as I move my cursor on these things that they highlight. The first part in this assembly was the bike frame, and then came a wheel, and then the second wheel, and then you have the gear back in the back wheel part. Then you have the crank, and then we have a couple of belt connections, and then we have the pedal. We've got the pedal on the 2 sides, the bike seat, the handle, and the handlebar. So the model tree shows us all the parts and the order in which they were assembled into the model. And you'll notice that there's a little red arrow that says insert here. I can grab that red arrow and move it back up to the first part, and you'll notice that the graphical representation of the model changes. Now all we see is that first part. So I can grab that red arrow and move it down, and I can just see how this assembly was put together one piece at a time. So there's the second wheel, and then we have the gear come in, the crank, the belts, and so forth until we have the whole bike put together. So the model tree is another way of referencing your solid model. In this case, this model is an assembly of parts, and so the model tree has all the different parts that make up this assembly. Now, we can do other things with this model tree as well. If I want to work on the bike frame model, I can right-click on it and say Open, and Creo opens up that model, and now I have the bike frame, and I can make changes to the bike frame. And once I make those changes and close the part, those changes will be reflected in the overall assembly. So it gives me a way of referencing all of my parts. It allows me to open up those parts and work with them. I can even say, well, what I want to do is I want to have all the parts here, but I only really want to focus on the frame. I can right-click on it and say Activate. And now you'll notice that my graphical representation of my assembly has changed. The only part that really is active is my frame. But I still see all the other parts, so I can get an idea of of how they all fit together. And that way I can make changes to my frame in reference to the other parts. If I want to then activate the whole assembly, I right-click on that top assembly and I say Activate. And now I'm back and have my full model. So PTC Creo is a pretty nice way of working with a solid assembly. It allows you to work with that assembly using two different representations, a procedural representation called the model tree, where we see all the parts in the assembly, and then a graphical representation so that we can understand what that solid model actually is and what it means. And then you can see up in the top we have all the tools. Right now we're in the model tab, and that gives us a variety of different tools that we can use, and we can move through the various different other tabs, and that gives us other sets of tools. I sometimes like to think of Creo as a modeling studio, a virtual modeling studio. And every time I click a different tab, I go into a different room. And in that room are different tools. And I can use those tools then to work on the model that I'm trying to build. Okay, so let's just take a look at this bike for a minute. And this bike, if you look at it very closely, you'll notice that the gear in the back here isn't connected to anything. The wheels are cool, but it's kind of curious as to how they're actually attached to the frame. This is an example of a conceptual model. And a conceptual model is where you don't have to have all the parts and pieces. You can just put it together and see how it looks and see if it's going to fit and see if it's going to work. I've set this model up with some kinematics. And so if I click on the Drag Components tool, I can now click on my pedal, and I can move this pedal around. And you can see that the pedal is connected to the wheels and the gears so that I can show the basic function of the parts of the bike. And like I said, this is certainly not a complete model. It's a conceptual model, but the purpose of that is to just try out different concepts, look at size, fit, color, those kinds of things before I invest in a detailed model. So let's try another model. In the curriculum, as you go through the curriculum, you'll get to do some exercises with this bike and try out and explore it. I'm going to close it. I'm going to erase it from memory so that I can now open up another model. I think you'll recognize